Okay, I think if those online can hear us and everything, we'll just go ahead and get started. We are expecting one more panelist, but I know he has a class that was running up against this time, so he might have got held up a little bit. But we'll have the panel at the end, so we'll just go ahead and start with our information. I'm Haley. Thank you for joining us today. I have colleagues Keith and Cecilia here as well. We're going to talk about the MRI program. We'll go over the solicitation review, the program history, some competitive intelligence information, limited submissions, practice and policies, and then we'll have the panel discussion and questions and answers, that kind of thing. And feel free to ask me questions as we go. This doesn't need to be a formal setting. We can just kind of chat about it. I've got Tom and Peter here. John is going to be coming in just a few minutes, I assume. And we'll let you pick that up.
So the major research instrumentation program by NSF is a long-running program. It's designed to get the next generation research instruments into the hands of researchers to open up new frontiers of research. This is done in two forms, through acquisition or development. Acquisition is off-the-shelf tools that can impact a PI's research, where there's very little risk in how the instrument operates, whereas development is something that does not exist and that the investigator needs to develop to do their transformative research. In the 2020 cycle, it's calling for up to 150 awards and $75 million in funding. The other part is, so we had the acquisition and development. These are numbers over the last 5 years based off funding totals. So what there's two tracks, basically less than $1 million and $1 million or more. And over the last 5 years, about half of the money has gone to those acquisition track $100 million. And what NSF tries to do, their goal is to have about a third of the awards be development, and about a third of the money going to those big track 2 awards. And what that means in terms of numbers, as we can see there, and this is again over the last 5 years, most of the awards are the acquisition, and they have the lowest average, 375K, where the development awards have a higher value, and there's more development awards that are in that track 2. So generally, if you're developing an instrument, they give you more time and more money. The other component of that is who is funding it, since it's wide open to all the directorates. That's math and physical sciences has the most. And you see computer and information science engineering and geographical sciences. Those have the higher awards because there's more development awards that have been to those 2 directorates than the other directorates. The other ones are all kind of bunched together. The other important thing to note is that ASU can submit 3 proposals for this. There's no the competition within ASU is to do the proposal, which is why Haley's talking about the limited submission process. But once it gets to NSF, you're not competing against somebody else from ASU for the award. It is wide open to all the applicants. There have been many examples of universities winning 2 and 3 awards in one cycle, and even 2 awards from the same directorate. Over the last 5 years across all MRI programs, not just the main call, but other calls where they are, it gets tagged with that as a program, but it's a special call. There have been 120 instances of universities winning 2 or more in the same year. There have been about 50 instances of 50 universities have won awards in 4 of the past 5 years, or all in the last 5 years. So there's no, well, we've had this past success that hurts my chances. It's like you make a good proposal, will be competitive. So that's kind of like the background on program history.
So I'm Cecilia Gill. I'm a proposal manager in research development, and I'm going to review the solicitation. So some key dates here. The limited submission deadline is November 4th. Full proposal deadline is January 21st, 2020. and with the ORSPA deadline 3 days before that, January. Personnel limitations, there are no restrictions or limits. The MRI program seeks broad representation of PIs, however, from underrepresented groups, women, persons with disabilities, and so on, and they encourage proposals with early career PIs. Eligibility, so the submission eligible organizations are PhD granting institutions of higher education. So that would be ASU. However, if you're a sub-awardee on another proposal with another institution being prime, non-PhD granting institutions of higher education, non-degree granting organizations, and consortia within specific circumstances as defined in the solicitation can also apply to the program. The goals of the program, increase access to multi-user instrumentation, proposals for instruments that might be too costly and are not appropriate for other NSF programs, instrumentation without which research may not otherwise occur, development of instruments that advance frontiers in science and engineering, and instruments that enhance research training of students and also address research needs across disciplinary boundaries. Proposal content, project description is about 15 pages with very specifically defined sections in the solicitation, and also additional sections for development proposals. For 1 million and above proposals, the impact of the instrument at the regional or national level has to be discussed in the project description. And the other standard NSF documents such as summary, references, facilities, and so on. However, there are a very specifically defined supplementary docs, some of which are required and some of which are encouraged depending on the type of proposal you're submitting and which track you're submitting under. So that is all defined in the solicitation. So for example, ORSPA letter classifying the organization has to be submitted. Letter of institutional commitment for the operation and maintenance of the instrument over the lifetime of the instrument has to be submitted. Letter of commitment for cost share and so on. So for all those specifics, please see the solicitation. The budget, 30% cost share of total project costs is required for PhD granting institutions, so that would be ASU. But if you also have subawards on your proposal, it's also required for non-degree granting institutions. And there are additional criteria, very specific administrative and technical requirements. There are solicitation-specific review criteria and additional criteria for acquisition and development. So you would need to check the solicitation for all those requirements.
Okay. For the limited submissions portion, Cecilia mentioned the date is November 4th. We ask that you make your application by then. So the steps are apply, evaluate, and submit. And so the application is available at asu.info-ready4. And also in this presentation, it's all linked. So when we send these out, you can have the direct to it. Limitation is 3 for ASU. That's including significantly funded subawardees. And there's only 2 allowed in track 1 and 1 allowed in track 2. We'll be monitoring that requirement very closely. Accurate submissions on that. This is the InfoReady site where you will apply through the portal. It's public, so you don't need to be on ASU's campus or anything like that. We ask that you upload a 3 to 5 page summary, your CV, a 1-page budget estimate, a 1-page cost share estimate, and a 1-page signature approval of that cost share. It doesn't have to have every detail lined out. It should equal 30%, but you don't have to have the full routing and all the signatures that are required at the full proposal stage. Just one signature from your chair or director signifying that you will meet all those requirements at the full proposal stage. So no extra work now, but work when you have to do it. If you have letters of recommendation and all your quotes and things like that, if you have those, please provide those in your limited submissions as well. Like this is the cost sharing requirement, and this is clearly outlined on InfoReady, so just the 1-page signature. Your 3 to 5 page project summary should address the things that Cecilia mentioned, only just in a shortened format. So if there's certain subheaders and sections, those should all be addressed so the reviewers see that you know the entire process of the MRI application, not just certain sections. The budget and CVs don't count towards your 3 to 5 pages, of course. The limited submissions review process is immediately after the internal deadline, and we turn it around in about 2 weeks. We have a 5 to 7 faculty peers, plus the limited submissions chairperson, who's also a faculty member. Reviewers are asked to consider the strengths and weaknesses of the proposals and then provide an overall score, so there's not weighting on certain sections. In addition to reviewing the sponsor solicitation, the panel will be asked to review the specific criteria that's in the solicitation specifically. They'll have it listed on a sheet for them to see as well, so it's clear what they're supposed to be reviewing. And then all the reviewer comments are provided to the applicants after the approvals. You'll see the notes and everyone's comments regarding your application. This is a timeline for you. Today's the kickoff. The deadline is November 4th. The review and notifications immediately afterwards. And there's 8 to 9 weeks before the ORSPA deadline of January 15th. And then the full proposals due January 21st. That is the end of the full proposal submission window, but that's, of course, the official deadline. From now, I'm going to move on to the panel unless there's any questions. If there's anyone online that has any questions, you'll have to unmute yourself and then speak up and we'll hear you and address that. Otherwise, I'll move on to the panel. Stop sharing correctly. There we go. Okay. We have Tom Coella here from Core Facilities and Peter Crozier from School of Engineering, Matter, Transport, Energy. Right, okay. I'm just gonna let you guys kind of address your topics, your different areas. Peter recently won an MRI award, and Tom from Core Facilities has a unique perspective of this instrumentation program. So Tom, I'll kick it off with you, or Peter. Tom, let's do you first.
Okay.
I have you on my sheet first.
All right.
Okay, and you can
And
just
I may ask you,
for it.
if it's not too much trouble, I may ask you to put on the slides that you
Sure.
the goals of the program.
Yeah, no problem. I'll do that right now.
So as Haley mentioned, thank you. My name is Tom Coella. I'm responsible for the core facilities that are managed under OCID, our Central Research Office, but also involved with and interact a lot with other core facilities throughout the university. So for those of you who are not familiar with core facilities, cores serve as a cores are a cluster of specialized equipment and expertise that provide a, as we could say, a sustainable platform for researchers to conduct research. And the purpose of the core is to provide provide access to equipment that wouldn't otherwise be feasible or practical to support at the PI level. So the first goal that's listed up here is increase access to multi-user instrumentation. So though it's not necessary for a core facility to be the recipient of a piece of equipment awarded through this program, it certainly helps to make the case for the justification of why the equipment or how the equipment will have a broad impact on research, both within the university and potentially beyond, regionally, etc. So I'd be happy to answer any questions you have related to the core facilities that we have. One of the prompts that Haley provided, and thank you for those, is what would I recommend to be 2 questions that you might ask yourself when preparing a proposal relative to core facilities. And I'd say the first is just to consider what facilities exist already on campus and whether or not the equipment that you're proposing is a good fit for existing facilities. or whether it would fit into something that we could create from a new facility. That would be one of the questions I think would be important. And then the other is, what would you recommend, or would you envision as a sustainable business model for the equipment? Again, whether that be within the context of a core facility that's managed with dedicated scientific staff, or whether it's within a PI managed lab. In either case, I believe it's important for the review panel to understand the plan for sustainable operations for the equipment. I would be happy to help in either case. We have business plan templates. I've just shared one recently with Sam, Gene, related to a piece of equipment. We could use the templates that are already in existence for core facilities. Again, whether or not you intend for the equipment to sit within a core. In terms of cost share, I would not say that there are any specific or special requirements above and beyond the norm for cost share related to core facilities, with the exception that if there is a staff scientist or someone who is core facility staff who is going to be a PI on the proposal themselves, then the cost share would reflect that distribution. Otherwise, it would be proportional to the participation, such that each department would be expected to contribute a portion in proportion to their participation in terms of the number of PIs, the level of utilization, etc. In a case where a core facility staff scientist is a PI or co-I on the proposal, then OCED would be responsible both for the OCED portion of cost share, in addition the departmental portion as well as the PI portion. So OCED would cover all of that for that individual portion. Any other concepts or ideas?
I just had a quick question about the cost share. So it sounds like you break it up based on the number of faculty that are involved in the proposal. And my question was really, if we had faculty from other universities, are we asking them to put in the same level of cost share as the internal ASU candidates? Yes.
I can't answer that.
Yeah, and I am going to tread lightly on this and we can get further into it. But it is total project costs. And the ones that I've seen in the past, it's split equally, but it is based on the total. We can go into more detail if you have like a sample budget or something we can look at, but I would say it's on the total, and not the ones I've seen in the past have all been split.
So if there was a faculty from another university, they would provide some fraction of the cost share.
Yes.
Based on their contributions and benefits.
Tom, what's the best way for people to get in touch with core facilities or you specifically? Is it email?
I would say probably email,
Okay.
and certainly, and I'll make these available over here. We have brochures. So we have 6 clusters or thematic areas or sectors of core facilities, ranging from biosciences, material sciences, instrument design, fabrication, and research computing, and a few others. So I'll leave these over here. Again, these does not represent all of the core facilities throughout the university. These are just the centrally managed cores. If you have questions, if there's something you're interested in that's not on here, please let me know, and I'll do my best to provide an answer or a contact to who else within the university might be looking after those sorts of things. Put you in touch with.
Does the cost share depend on which college you're in? Or is it always the same percentage, 50% KED, 25% college, 20% department, and then 5% investigators?
No, it's depending upon your specific budget. So the National Science Foundation just requires the 30% on the total, and you'll have to work out with your department exactly what that will look like for your proposal.
Is this negotiable with KED?
I'm assuming that I am not an official representative of the KED cost sharing arm, but I'm assuming that they will all be collaborative with KED, because that's previous ones have been that kind of thing. But once you have a sample budget, then you can.
Well, so far I've been given a really hard line on this, that you have to get 5% of the cost share from the investigators.
Yeah, I think that each department might do it a little differently, depending on available resources and things.
I would say, though, I can't say for sure, I would say the variability would exist more so among the distribution among the units and the investigators than between KED and colleges. As far as I know, 50% is fairly firm on the KED side. Again, with the exception that if there's a KED employee, a KED staff scientists, then their proportion would be added to that.
Right. And that's,
Okay, Peter, we'll move on to you. Maybe describe your recent
sure.
award.
So I'm a professor in material science, and I got a 1.9 million track 2 proposal funded last year for a special detection system. So I work with the transmission electron microscopes a lot here, and so it's a detector, basically a glorified camera for the microscopes. So that was our first try at getting it. I know the NSF system pretty well. So at the moment I have 4 NSF grants, individual PI grants, and I've served on many NSF panels, including many NSF MRI panels. So I sort of know the NSF game a little bit and what they're looking for. So the key things for NSF is intellectual merit and broader impact. Your proposal must make sure that the intellectual merit is very prominently displayed, and the broader impact of the educational outreach has to be prominently displayed as well. Often that is challenging to pull off because especially if you're going for track 2, for example, the cost share, I think I had 47 senior investigators that were all kicking in a small amount of money. So you need to sort of somehow bring on board, if you're going for track 2, you need to bring on board a large fraction of the ASU community. And in fact, you have to bring on board people from outside ASU because it has to have a regional impact. But when you're putting the proposal together, you can't simply get a paragraph from 47 people and put it into the NSF narrative. So you pretty well have to balance this thing where essentially you decide to focus on 3 or 4 really high impact projects that you feel your team can write about, which doesn't mean that the 40-odd senior investigators don't have fabulous projects, but you simply cannot highlight them all, otherwise you'll lose the focus. So there needs to be a clear intellectual focus. So the challenge with doing this is that on the one hand, you need to demonstrate a broad impact on the research community, mainly at ASU and outside, but you somehow have to be able to really tell a good story, which means that you need to have some key sound bites and themes running through the proposal. The way that I did that was I sort of was perfectly upfront with all the people that I was contacting. I said, look, send me a paragraph. I might use it or I might not use it. And then the group of, there were a group of 5 of us that worked together on this. We pretty well decided what we felt were strategically the most important areas to the National Science Foundation, wherever you're thinking of hitting. So for example, in materials, quantum materials is a hot area, right? So biomaterials was a hot area. So we decided to choose the areas that were strategically hot and to try and choose 3 or 4 areas where we felt there was a sort of common thread that we could weave through them. So that takes quite a bit of strategic thinking. And I think that, again, everyone wants the instrumentation to come to ASU, so it really doesn't matter how you tell the story. All the people whose projects were not explicitly included in the grant, if you get the equipment here and they have access to it, then they'll be happy. So I think, again, I can't stress enough the importance of intellectual merit. You really, when you serve on these panels, you have to read maybe 10 of these and you just become numb by the time you get to proposal number 8 or 9. So you need to really tell a compelling story that gets the reviewers excited. And you must make sure there's broader impact in educational outreach. I know there's sometimes a temptation to say, well, it's instrumentation, we don't need that. The number of times I've seen 2 proposals that are otherwise equally tied on the technical intellectual merit, and the decision to give the award would go to the one that also had a significant broader impact and educational component. And those of you that have done NSF grants know that we have training graduate students, adding a few extra lectures to some undergraduate lecture course, with what I call boilerplate stuff, which you kind of need to have in there. But if you can come up with something that's really a little bit more creative and interesting that makes your broader impact and educational outreach stand out from the next person's, then that will work in your favor. And certainly, you know, the intellectual merit is intellectually, of course, the hardest part to put together. That's the part which you'll spend most of your time worrying about. And the broader impact is often a sort of lighter part of the proposal, but I would say make sure it's got a creative element to it as well if you want to be competitive. The other thing I want to say is that there's really two proposals you need to worry about here. One is the internal proposal and the other is the external proposal. And in my mind, they were completely separate processes. And in fact, John Spence, I invited on as a PI for the internal part of the proposal, and then I fired him after we won the internal one and went to a different group. So you have to think strategically here. You know, how do you win? You've got to win the internal competition, right? If you don't win the internal competition, it doesn't matter what plans and strategy you have for the NSF thing. If you don't win the internal competition, you're going nowhere. So the strategy you need to win the internal competition and the strategy you need to win the NSF, they're not uncoupled, of course, but you know, you need to think about ASU will be interested in knowing also that you can have the potential to win. So then that brings up the question of who's going to take the lead. So if you're looking at the team, who's going to be the lead PI? The reason they made me take the lead was because I have a pretty good track record with NSF. Right? I know what the NSF game is. I know a lot of the program directors, and I know what they're looking for. And because I've served in so many panels, I know what the panels are often looking for. So you should think who might be strategically the best person to be the lead. And even though you might be driving, and in fact, we've on other things, I was talking to René Sharman the weekend, that we've put together MRI proposals where we've put some figurehead on as the lead PI, and we pretty well wrote the whole thing and, you know, wanted them out front because there was a political reason for doing that. So you want to sort of think about that in terms of how does that play out in terms of the internal competition? How does it play out in terms of the external competition? The internal competition, certainly people will be looking at many of the same questions that the external reviewers will be looking at, but the internal people will also look at, can you convince them that your proposal, that you can put together a winning proposal for NSF? Because especially if we do the phase 2, we only get one shot. And we've often been on the losing side of that. And it's, you know, so the idea is you get one shot per year. And the university, of course, wants us to be successful. So you need to think carefully about the strategy there. I knew some of my friends were competing with me last year, and I know that some of them left things, I would say, to the last minute, to put it in the extreme. So if you have something which is thrown together in the last few minutes, I mean, maybe most people are smarter than me, but I think it's really hard to come up with a competitive product if you're putting substantial intellectual content into the data. I mean, I just don't think that flies. And I would definitely say at the NSF, if you don't think your proposal looks perfect or as close to perfect as you can make it, trust me, the reviewers will definitely not think it's perfect. So the MRI that we got 4 excellence and 1 very good excellent. So it's a pretty tough bar, and it really needs to be engineered. The intellectual content needs to be engineered, and the writing has to be perfect. So I just came back from an NSF panel last week. You know, these proposals with typos in them, or, you know, a figure caption where the last line of the figure caption got deleted because we know what they had done. They had done the PDF conversion an hour before the proposal was due. There were issues with the PDF conversion, and they didn't have time to fix it. So those proposals go in the garbage can. I can tell you that the perception from the reviewers were, forget the content, even if the content was good, the perception was this person can't even put together a document that's not riddled with typos and doesn't have lines missing. We're not going to give them $1 million to do it. And so so you really have to, you know, it's a pretty competitive game. And so you need to give yourself, again, depending on how you write, you need to give yourself time to get it done correctly. Now, I'm not saying there aren't people that can throw proposals together at the last minute and get them funded. There might be. I can tell you that every collaborative proposal I've been involved with, where the lead PI has been working on substantial intellectual content up until the day of the submission, that they never get funded, never. And you can just see that you need a lot of time to refine. And the same is true for the internal thing. What happens, I think, with the internal thing is people say, oh, it's just the internal thing. I'll just throw something together at the end. How many internals did you have last year?
10.
It's 10. That's like NSF odds. You've got a 10% chance. And I'll tell you, I knew that some of my colleagues would not do it. They would be busy and they would sort of throw something together and it would not have that polish on it. So I think that is at 5 pages.
It's 5 pages,
Yeah.
and I want to know that the reviewers take it very seriously because they're giving their time. So they take it very seriously, just like the NSF reviewers do. You know, they review them very critically.
Yes, and again, they're going to be looking. You know, this is going to be what you put into that 5 pages is what they're going to extrapolate to what you put into the 15 pages. And so they're not going to interpret that as saying, oh, well, this was just the internal thing. We know that they'll do a better job. So I think you really have to be prepared to make a big commitment. And it did take me a long time to do these. It was a lot of work. And it was certainly having the 47 senior investigators. It's not just the creating the intellectual content that was in weaving it together. And of course, you have all these PIs that are all fighting. There's just sheer tedium of getting 47 NSF formatted bios, getting 47 commitments of cost share, getting 47 conflict of interest forms, all of that stuff, which NSF are pretty tough. If they find that you've got a conflict of interest form from one of your 47 investigators, which shows an error in it, that will make your proposal out of compliance and they'll throw it out. So it's all that mundane stuff. It takes a long time, and I was fortunate to have help. And they were pushing me because when they were pushing me, and it was really great to get some help with that. It really made a big difference.
Yeah.
Traced all these research people.
I encourage you to talk to your research administrators and the staff in your units and reach out now to them if you're interested in applying so that they can start helping you with standard documents and things and start pulling those and getting those ready for you and with you.
And of course, the higher the amount as you go up in that phase, I think with phase 1, it's probably not maybe quite as bad, although I wouldn't relax, but certainly the higher the dollar amount you're looking to go for, the more competitive it's going to be. I've sat on, for example, if somebody wants $2 million, that means there are 4 proposals that in the same panel worth $500,000 each. That means if they're going to give the $2 million to that one person, they're essentially not giving the $500,000 to 4 other people. So that $2 million proposal sort of has to be much better than the 4 $500,000 proposals to justify for the program directors to justify depriving 4 universities of resources in order to give a lot of money to one. So it's.
How did you solicit information, ideas from your collaborators or your users?
So
Brainstorming plus writing, or
I think, well, I had a selfish angle that I wanted for my own research because of the area that it was in. It's very much in my field, and so I had a pretty good idea of what types of areas might work well. So that was one part of the answer to that question, and the other part was I knew what was strategically important to NSF. So I knew that, as I say, quantum materials was a hot area, and soft hard materials interfaces is a really hot area at NSF right now. And so I then looked for teams, sub-teams that could put together something that was viable in those 2 areas.
did they write pieces?
Yeah, they wrote pieces. So what I did was I had 5 PIs, so there was myself and then 4 co-PIs, and so essentially each one of the co-PIs was the lead. I had 4 themes that I decided were going to be the primary intellectual merit areas. So I had 1 PI on soft biomaterials, 1 PI on quantum materials, one PI on mesoporous materials, which is another area that ASU is strong on, and then one on catalysis, which is what I do. So the other factor I would say, so there's three factors. One is what's hot at NSF. Two is, can you find teams at ASU that can write it? And then the third factor is, what's the international recognition of those people outside ASU? So you're looking for people that had, so for example, on mesoporous materials, we have a pretty strong group here, and the guy that invented those materials, this guy Omar Yagi, used to be a professor here, and so he was not a co-PI, but we were able to talk about the history of that person in ASU. Electron microscopies had a 50-year tradition at ASU, and so that was well known outside. So you're also thinking about how strong those people are known outside ASU. Yeah.
I just wanted to add, when we were working on Peter's proposal, I'm Tara, I'm the proposal manager. I wanted to ask Peter if you could share a little bit of the strategy you used in terms of the letters of collaboration we also reached out for, because we had to make a case for regional and national impact with the larger board, and that was quite an endeavor, right?
Yeah.
During
So,
government shutdown.
again, what I did in terms of planning the proposal, so I had there was the initial group, I'd say a group maybe of about 10 to 12 people that were my inner planning group, of which 5 of them became co-PIs. So in addition to the co-PIs, I had other people that were very supportive, but who were not going to be, because you can only have 5 co-PIs. And then among that group of about 12 planning people, we thought carefully about how to reach people outside ASU, at other academic institutions in the southwestern US, at government labs, and also industry. And then we sort of divided up who was going to contact who. And again, this was done far in advance. So this is done in parallel with the planning of the intellectual content of the proposal, in order to make sure that you have enough time to reach all the people that you need to reach.
Did they write the letters or write the letters?
There's a standard language that NSF require, which basically said they agree to do, there's a boilerplate language.
Which is
You're not,
in the project.
That's right, they
Yeah.
were just agreeing.
So we used email outreach to kind of state, that this was not final yet, but we took snippets out of the project description and said, this is sort of the role that we, and see you coming into play. And that was often enough.
that's
Got
right.
a couple,
A few, I would say a few people dropped out because of some of the industrial people, I think there was a legal issue there. But most of the people, that was adequate for them to sign on. And they must use the standard language in NSF.
but that's a whole other level of effort. That
Yeah,
One of those things, you can't leave it to the last
yeah,
minute.
you can't be.
And it made a good case for us. We had a good handful of letters.
Yeah.
And that was part of the limited submission or after?
We had, in the limited submission, actually, I was just looking at it. In the limited submission, we had, I dedicated almost a page to all the ASU collaborators and some of the outside collaborators. And I think there was maybe, if I recall, and I think they didn't have to, at the limited submission stage, you don't need anything formally from those people. I had sort of reached out to them all, and they had all said, yes, we're interested, tell us what you want us to do. And so based on that, that was all I needed to include their name in the limited submission proposal. So I think I was just opening those documents just to, I think I had.
You had a quote.
I may have had a quote too, yeah. I mean, here's the kind of, I don't know if you can see this, it's probably true. But this is on the first page, so I had a list of all these people. And you can see that I had, these are, in blue, these are the subtopics that they were interested in. So these are all the areas they were interested in. But that, so that was sort of broad brush to show broad impact. But then I just selected a subset of 4 of them to tell more detailed stories in the limited submission, and then that evolved into the full proposal as well. Yeah.
Did you contact the manufacturer and get any kind of, besides a quote, any kind of information on, especially if it was development, how eager they were, how they're giving you a deal? Or?
Yeah, so I'm at this headache point now where I have the money and now there's a lot of technical issues because the instrumentation is new. So I would say that the communication, so at first we communicated with just one manufacturer, Gatan, and we got as detailed a quote as we could from them, and then after the grant was funded, another manufacturer came on board, although it looks as if they're not going to be competitive at this point in time. So I think, and I did talk to the program, after they chose to fund us, of course, we had to go back and there was a budget revision required where they shaved the budget down by 5 or 10%. And I did talk a lot to the NSF program director at the time about the challenge of, because this was a phase 2, it's not a development project, but it's a sort of buying something off the shelf, but it's buying something that hasn't yet been developed properly by the manufacturer. So there's, you know, it's cutting edge instrumentation, it's new, they're beta testing devices at Berkeley and things like
But
that.
they put service contracts in that normally NSF doesn't pay for?
Yeah, they're all of, in the quotation, I think it was, there was a warranty for a year or two.
Perfect. Dr. Spence, thanks for joining us.
Well,
It's your
I'm
turn.
frantically looking through here to find an MRI that I've been involved with successful apart from yours. It's a terrific experience. You did 99% of the work. That's absolutely correct. And I suppose the most successful one was the cryo-M machine. That wasn't an MRI. We've also had the SEC, and I got from the NIH, the funding for the printer. There's an instrumentation program at NIH to do this. Didn't forget about it. The cryo-M, I would say the success of that was primarily due to the legwork done by Mark Holm, because he achieved the remarkable feat of finding southwestern region at using potential. And this is a huge amount of work because you've just simply got to contact them. They don't reply to email, you phone them, you can answer them again. This drags on for weeks. So lesson number one is when you're collecting outside support, start early. It is completely hopeless to find people who will write you a letter saying they'll use it. If you start 2 weeks before it's due, you have to start 3 months before it's due, at least. And I think that's, together with our historical reputation in electron microscopy, was the reason that we got it, although ASU is not known in the biological electron microscopy field prior to that time, and there's not a huge connection between the two, material science here and biology. So it was the user base that sold it. Thus, secondly, we were able to offer the facilities to install at the house, at the building. And it was this high quality space, thanks to people like Peter in earlier years, Ray Carpenter, which is very expensive. And then finally is the question of faculty. With cryo-M, we'd always had a chicken and egg problem. We have tried many times to get a cryo-M to SU because it's the natural extension of existing effort. And I've written several papers with the Berkeley group on cryo-M, both laser and particular. So it was something we wanted to do. And whenever we tried to hire faculty, chemistry were quite supportive. They would say, well, the faculty would come for interviews and they'd say, well, you know, we need startup money for a machine. Why haven't you come here if you don't have a cryo-M? And then when we tried to get a cryo-M, they'd say, but you've got no faculty. But you know, the stars aligned this time. It was miraculous. And Berlin came at the same time, and also Brent and Nenga. No idea. That was just such a stroke of good luck, because none of us were involved in any way in that hiring decision. I think it was pure chance. By pure chance, they hired someone that was greatly of interest to many of us in both physics and biology. So with the two faculty, and I'd been following what Brent had been doing, I'd been giving talks at Genelia Farm, and I knew about that. So I was able to write about that. So it was a combination of two faculty, the very expensive building. When we built that, we made 4 bays machines, one for future growth, This was the future growth. Perfect.
I'm sorry, Peter was mentioning the review process and his experience as a reviewer for.
I'm sorry. say that again.
Peter was mentioning
Peter.
the review process.
Yes.
And the experience from that and what the NSF actually views as important. What do you think was important as the review process for that proposal?
Sorry, I don't really understand.
Oh, I'm sorry. What do you glean from the reviewers as the most important parts of the proposal?
Well, that's just what I said, that we were able to offer. More important than that is technical stuff. Right? These are the things that we have, that ASU is remarkable in its willingness to pay for technical staff. Most universities, the money goes the other way. Here, the university is willing to support technical staff. No doubt it comes out overhead on grants, but you know, my friend Bob Sinclair at Stanford they're constantly asking faculty to pay salaries of technical. So that's a crucial factor, and it's a continuity of expertise. That's absolutely vital. It's constant churning of technical staff at very low salaries fail. That's a common situation in many universities. But we're fantastically lucky at ASU to get elected from across. Then there was the building. Then there was Mark Hall being willing to solicit all these. And they were hospitals. We had, you know, Banner Health writing us a support letter saying they would use it regularly. And in fact, the big problem is the maintenance contract is $150K a year or something, maybe more.
200 now.
200. Okay, so we had to figure out how we could pay that and make a convincing case that we could. So, well, you don't want to hear all this, but there's a competing. Another reason it worked was because there's competition. There was JOL and there was the FEI, the one we invented. We decided on the JOL was half the price. The day before we had to commit ourselves, my phone rang in my office. It was the FEI guy, and he must have found out the price. He could have, I mean, I can't believe it. There must have been industrial buying because he offered a price which was almost after having a price a third larger, and suddenly the day before came down to the same for their machine. So we changed our company. But that meant that we had a lot more money. And that's how we bought the second GM in this building, servicing, the screening cryo-M machine that's in there. And it also, of course, eased the problem. But we were in a position where we could bargain for maintenance contract time. So they offered to maintain without a maintenance contract under warranty for the first 2 years. What is a few? Big issue. And of course, JOL, the Japanese said 5 years. That was wonderful. And FEI, now Thompson, would only give us 1 year. So it was all a matter of negotiation. But that doesn't, and that came later after we got your institute. We were writing the thing.
Well,
So it was a collection of conditions we were able to put together because ASU was deeply supported. And because Mark Collins worked so hard.
does anyone have any questions for Dr. Spence particularly? Or anyone else?
Will you be reviewing proposals?
I hope
or-
not.
Oh, darn.
Will you be
Sure they'll be
guiding and
asked.
advising those of us who get selected?
I hope not.
Now, we had another MRI last year with Bill Graves for this machine, and that was unsuccessful.
Is there any
I
questions
have just a
online?
real quick question. Do you have any, is there any intelligence on the number of faculty that you have to have for like a track 2 or a track 1? It seems like you can always get more. You have to figure out where to cut it off for getting support. So the 3 or 4 topics seems like a good strategy, but then there's, you know, how many more do you really need?
So that's the
47 seems like a pretty good
that's
number.
the tricky part of this. I think that if you put yourself into the mode of the NSF reviewer, they love to have an exciting story being told. So that means you need to sort of really craft the story around, you know, 3 or 4 themes. You can't, yeah, and integrate the effort. However, after they say how wonderful that focused effort is, at the very next sentence they'll say as well, it's how many people does this impact? So that's why the way that we went about that was we sort of told the story on a few projects, but then made sure that these other people, that their stories were included in the form of like 1 line, something like that. Yeah, it's a bit of a balancing act.
I'll ask if there's any questions online and then we'll let everyone have the rest of the afternoon. respectful of time. If you're online, you just have to unmute yourself and then speak up, but no pressure.
Is there a chat?
That's actually from her. Anyone else in the room then?
I will just make one final comment if I can, and that is, please keep in mind the costs above and beyond the instrumentation itself. When you're developing your budget, look at physical facilities. A lot of times we've learned through mistakes, and we've got, after we get an award, we hadn't given thought to the renovations that might be required to support the instrumentation. And then it becomes a mad scramble trying to come up with funding to support the
But
equipment.
NSF does not pay for renovations. This instrumentation does not pay for it. That has to be just like separately negotiated.
Absolutely.
Can I make a comment? I think the single most important thing is this writing style. As Peter says, you have to have an exciting story. The most important thing is to put the work in context, and the first sentence must jump off the page and say why this work is important. The worst thing you can do is to have the first sentence for some obscure technical aspect of the problem which somebody you've just published a paper showing how to solve. But you've got to tell them, audience, tell them why the work is important scientifically, and put it in the context of larger work. And always remember that the people who you don't cite the references will refuse the grant. I mean, it's really important to cite reference, to cite your competitors in the references.
Okay. That's all for this afternoon. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
It's going to be again, don't